Please warm welcome Aneta.
Hello everyone. My name is Aneta and I'm the global QA lead for a fintech company called SumUp. I have the pleasure of doing the last presentation for today, so I promise to try and be my least boring self. As you know, today I will be talking about a newish tool for UI automation called Testwarez, but I will not do a feature walkthrough today because you can see the features of Testwarez basically everywhere on the internet. And instead, I want to tell you the story of how and why we decided to use Testwarez and what we think it's good for at SumUp. So the story starts over a year ago when I joined SumUp. And this is my most exciting and my most challenging job so far. So I knew that the biggest problem I had to tackle in the company was test automation. And I was really anxious to do good. So I started doing a serious research, trying to put well-documented, well-explained testing strategy in place to present to the company by learning all the technology we were using, the automation that we already had, and so on. But the best thing about SumUp is that it's full with really smart people. And you know what smart people don't do when they have a problem? They don't wait for you to solve it. So no one was really waiting for my test strategy. And the front-end team of the company actually approached me. And they said, you know what? We had this tool, Testwarez. We were doing some experiments with it. We want to do automation with it. But we're facing some issues. So can you help? And I had only heard of Testwarez at a test conference 1 year ago, where they did a comparison between Testwarez and Selenium WebDriver. And I was really not impressed with Testwarez. And it was definitely not going to be my choice. But before I enter an argument, I wanted to make sure I know everything about the tool there is to know. So my first question was how it works. Finding the answer to this question was not so easy as you may think, because everywhere there was a list of the things it can do for you, but not how it does it. Thanks to Appletool's blog post, I managed to gather some information. And the thing about Testwarez is it's JavaScript exclusive tool. So you can only write your tests in JavaScript. Once you have your tests written down and you start execution, the first thing that Testwarez does is use a JavaScript preprocessor such as Webpack to put them in a single JavaScript file. Then Testwarez loads a browser, and this browser can only be Chrome or Chrome-based or Electron. It loads an empty web page and puts your JavaScript test code in it. What it means for you is that your test code is going to run inside the browser, and it's going to be sort of sandboxed. Then Testwarez opens an iframe and navigates to the application you're going to test. Finally, through some sort of black magic, it shares context between your test code and the application you're going to test. So what you can see straight away is that you have no network communication because everything happens inside the browser, and that's what gives Testwarez its speed. But also, your test code is inside the browser, so you're getting some limitations from there. And from what I saw, I still thought that Selenium is kind of better, but I also need to admit that I'm a Selenium WebDriver fangirl because this is the tool I've been using for my entire career, and so far I haven't faced a task that I couldn't solve with WebDriver. And to give you some context, here is how WebDriver works. First, you have the Selenium WebDriver process, which is the library you add to your tests that executes the commands you put, like click a button, enter text, and so on. But as probably most of you know, the great thing about WebDriver is that it can talk to any major browser out there. To do this, it uses something like a translator, the browser driver or the browser bindings. This is a separate process. It's different for every browser you want to use. So there is the Chrome driver, Firefox driver, and so on. And this is the process that knows how to talk directly to the browser you're using. The great part is that the browser driver is using native events to talk to the browser, meaning that when you want to simulate a click, for example, it's as close to what an actual user would do as possible. The bad news is that these three are talking via HTTP, so you have network communication, which makes the test execution slower, and of course, you might have issues between all of these components. So the very fast comparison of the two. On one side, you have Selenium, and in a nutshell, it controls the browser from the outside. This means that it's slower, but it also has access to the environment outside of the browser. So you can also control file system and everything else on the system you're running your tests. And it gives you a very close experience to the real user experience. And you can control Edge, Firefox, Chrome, basically anything you think of. On the other hand, you have Cypress, which is controlling the browser from the inside. But it can only do it with Chrome or Electron, which I think basically no one outside of IT is using. So that leaves Chrome. But it does it very fast because it talks to it from the inside. However, it uses JavaScript events, which are slightly different than the native events in the browser. So with this information, I still didn't like Cypress. And I compiled a list of all the reasons why I don't want to use Cypress. And the first thing is the limited cross-browser testing. Now, in some cases, I know that this might not be important. But what my company does is we're trying to help small business owners accept card payments. And when I say small business owners, this means people from all kinds of backgrounds. People that use different devices, different operation systems, and different browsers. And we want to make sure that anyone can use our system. So we want to make sure it runs everywhere, not just on Google Chrome. Then the topic about native versus JavaScript events. Here I couldn't find any hard data, what is the impact of this, and how often would a test, for example, pass with JavaScript events and fail in the real world. So it might be a very low risk, but since I don't know, it is a risk. Since we started discussing Cypress more than a year ago, back then it was a very immature tool. It was used by a very small number of companies, mostly small ones, and I was having the strong feeling that my company is going to become a beta tester for Cypress, and that wasn't something I was very happy to do. And last but not least, it is JavaScript only. So if you are a JavaScript developer already, of course, that's no issue for you. But if you are an automation QA with a different background, like me, I come from Java world, it can be a serious problem for you, because we're not just talking about learning a different language, we are talking about paradigm shift from object-oriented programming to functional programming. And it can be a steep learning curve. So again, that was not something I was really happy about. So I put this neat list together, and I scheduled a meeting with my front-end colleagues. I told them all this, and I was sure that the battle is won. But what I got was actually some really surprised faces. And people said, well, okay, but we really like it. And also, they said, we tried WebDriver. WebDriver didn't work for us. So I was like, what? WebDriver? It just works. How one different company says for their products. And after this meeting, I had two ideas. First was, I'm going to prove to them that WebDriver works. I'm going to do a very small proof of concept framework to show them that WebDriver is awesome and it's really easy to use. But also, I reminded myself that these are great developers and their preference probably comes from somewhere. So what could be the reason that I was seeing different things? It was very simple. What I was doing was I was reading articles and blog posts and watching YouTube videos. And what they were doing was writing the actual code. So I decided that if I want to understand them, I have to walk in their shoes. And I have to try and actually write some tests with Cypress. So that's exactly what I started doing. I thought, okay, I'm going to get my 3 most critical smoke scenarios, and I'm going to automate them first with Cypress, then with WebDriver, and see the real differences. First, I started by learning a little bit about JavaScript, because like I said, I knew nothing about it. But very soon, I started seeing the good things about Cypress. The first thing, they have really nice documentation. And when I say really nice, I mean that for a newbie like me that didn't know a lot about JavaScript, everything was super easy to understand. The documentation was ordered. Basically, every main work use case you can come up with was listed. On top of that, the Cypress team had made the effort to make a lot of videos showing you how to do stuff. So you could almost do no wrong. But to make sure you really can do no wrong, they made a lot of coding examples, including bad practices and anti-patterns, which were perfectly explained. And they even had demo repositories where you can literally see the code and reuse it in your own system. So starting to do something was very quick, very nice. And another thing was that a lot of functionality in Cypress comes out of the box. So you don't need to create your own test framework and put Cypress in it. You basically add Cypress to your front-end project and you're ready to start writing end-to-end tests. How they do this? Well, they've built one of the most popular testing frameworks for JavaScript, Mocha, inside Cypress. And for a good measure, they also added the assertions from Chai. Since I didn't want to choose these myself, I was very happy that they came bundled up and I could start using them straight away. But I also saw that if you are a senior developer or a senior QA with JavaScript and you have different preferences, well, you don't really have a choice. You have to go with Mocha and Chai. So the scenario I started with was probably the first scenario anyone starts with. Given that I am a registered user, I should be able to log in with correct credentials. That's super simple, right? But actually the hardest part about this test case is given that I'm a registered user, because this means that I need to already have a user in my system. And this was the problem that the developers were facing, because they were trying to use a user that was already existing in the test system. And of course, when you have several test environments, this becomes hard. When you want to run your tests in a Docker container, this becomes impossible. So I didn't also want to register my user via the user interface. And I decided to resort to something I've done many times in my career before. Use the backend services to just inject my user before my tests, and then I would be sure that I can log in no matter what my environment is. According to Cypress, this was possible to do. So let's go. The first function I came across was SciRequest. And it does exactly what the name suggests. It helps you do requests to backend services. Now here, another part of the Cypress magic is revealed. Besides running your code inside the browser, Cypress actually also starts a Node.js process in the background. And this is the way it allows you some interaction with the world outside of the browser. So when you want to do network requests, for example, they are going to be executed not in the browser, but in Node runtime environment. And that was cool, it worked, but to use it, I needed to define everything about my services, the endpoints, authentication way, the data I wanted to send, and I felt stupid doing that because my front-end application is talking to my backend. It knows how to do all of these things. It's already written there. What I wanted to do is to just reuse it, because that's one of the other benefits Cypress is supposed to give you. Cypress tests live in the same repository as the application you're testing. I hit a different problem though. The application code that I wanted to use was server-side, of course. And my test code runs in the browser, so I couldn't just reuse it. I had to do some things with it. Again, the Node.js process can come in handy. Cypress has other methods which are executed there, such as side task and side exec. But all of this research took over 1 week of my time. Because Cypress being a new tool, it wasn't like you go to Stack Overflow, you type, I can't do this, and you have 10 answers. I went to Stack Overflow, I couldn't find any answers to my question. I post a new question, and in 3 days, the only answer I see is, yeah, I have the same problem. Thank you very much. So I just decided that I can't spend over a week to write a single test case. It shouldn't be so hard. There are these people that believe all good things in life are hard, but I'm not one of them. If something is really hard, I believe that I'm simply doing it wrong. So I went back to the drawing board. And what I did is I started gathering information from all the articles and blog posts where people said that Cypress is great and Cypress is working. And I tried to compare their use cases to what I'm trying to do. Relatively fast, a pattern did emerge. Everyone who were happy with Cypress didn't have or didn't care about their backend. And suddenly I also started thinking about the problem I was trying to solve right now. Because what the front-end team in the company wanted to do is to be able to run some sort of business verification in their CI that is fast and give them information about more than their code, like the unit tests. They didn't care about the backend either. In fact, they didn't want their CI build to fail if the backend services are not working. So, the obvious solution was to just ignore the backend. And luckily for me, Cypress can do that, and can do it pretty easily. So what I proceeded to do was to simulate all the responses from my backend and to isolate the real thing entirely. Cypress supports out-of-the-box stubbing of different endpoints. It has a method called sciroot, and it allows you to intercept any request your front-end application is doing to the backend, and instead reply with a pre-recorded fixture inside Cypress. What you need to specify here is the method of your request, the endpoint, and, for example, what status you want returned. This is also really neat if you want to test how your front end is going to behave when your backend is returning 400 or 500 statuses without really breaking your backend, of course. But you probably want to return more than a status code. You probably want to return some data. So again, Cypress has you covered. Fixtures are supported out of the box. Cypress will even create a fixture directory for you, where the only thing you have to do is put JSON files with the responses you want to see later. And then you can refer to them by fixture and the name of your JSON file. You don't care how they're going to be found on the file system or how they're going to be read. And if we go back to the previous example, besides the status code, you can put the exact response that you want your front end to receive. So you have complete control on everything that will be visualized and everything that you're going to do in your front end test. On top of this, if you want to do some variation testing, you don't have to create a million fixture files with every little detail you want to change, because you can manipulate the fixtures on the fly. So you can omit different parts of your JSON to see what's happening if your backend returns something broken, or you can just change some of the data and test with different users or whatever you want to do. Last but not least, for some people, writing the root command is just too much writing. So Cypress even did a shortcut version of the command. So you can use root which defaults to get method and 200 response by only putting the endpoint you want to hit and the response you want to receive. The last part, the S, in this case risk profile, is something Cypress calls aliasing, and it's just helping you to later refer to this root in your test code. So when I applied all of these things, my tests did work, and they worked pretty nicely. So I started to see the good about Cypress, and I started to make a list about all the things I liked about it. The first thing was, it was really just as fast as they promised. It was fast as it is, but if you remove the backend and you basically have no network dependencies, then it was really fast. The browser, driver, and the test frameworks were all in the same tool. I didn't have to build my own test framework in order to be able to start immediately pushing tests. I didn't have to use any third-party library to do my stubbing. Again, it just came out of the box, so no need to learn different stuff or to inject a lot of dependencies to your code. And last but definitely not least, front-end developers liked it, and they were willing to write the tests. We did started using Cypress 1 year ago. So 1 year later, this is what we have in sum up. We have 3 major React front-end applications in our company, and right now all 3 of them are using Cypress for their end-to-end tests. We have over 150 scenarios, but the best thing about them is that they are not written and maintained by QAs only. It's shared responsibility between both QAs and developers. And the critical scenarios for all these applications are running in CI, in Docker environment, on every PR. So the QAs no longer get to test completely different, completely broken builds. And I think everyone is pretty happy about it. But what I learned from my experiment was that comparing Cypress and Selenium is pretty hard, because it's almost not correctly to compare them for me. They are doing different things on different levels of the software lifecycle. On one hand, we have the Cypress, which is the cool kit of the front end, and it's doing great in testing JavaScript applications. It does what unit tests cannot do. It verifies your business logic, not just the quality of your code. But when you have to talk with different systems like microservices or anything else, it gets very hard and very tacky to maintain. So I think Selenium WebDriver still has a place, and frameworks with it still has a place as a real user acceptance tool, because it's still pretty good to simulate what a user would do with all kinds of stuff like opening different tabs in the browser, uploading and downloading files, and so on. And they're just really different. So if you're just working on a front-end applications, especially if they're relatively small, sure, you can just go and use Cypress and not care about WebDriver at all. If you already have built a powerful and stable framework with Selenium WebDriver, you can probably live without Cypress. But for us, combining the both gave us what we really need: fast feedback for front-end developers and security that our code will work on different browsers and for different users. However, I had a bigger learning. I still prefer Selenium. And I'm pretty sure that it has nothing to do with rational arguments. It's just how I feel about it. But I also realized that choosing Selenium or any other tool, no matter how great it is, will give me nothing if the team doesn't want to use it. And I think that as QA, my main responsibility is not to test the application, and it's not to find bugs. My main responsibility is to make the whole team feel invested about the QA process and the whole team to care about the quality of the product they're delivering. So for me, the main learning was that the team should always come before any tool I like or dislike. Thank you so much for being here, especially as the last talk. And I will try to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks for sharing with your experience. And I have a question, because in our team we're also using Selenium and Cypress. And how did you do with logs in your pipeline? Because for us, logs from Cypress and investigations, the failure, it's a little harder comparing with Selenium and like usual tools. Do you have any experience of it?
Well, I have not heard any complaints really. So I'm now thinking about it, but I think one of the reasons we didn't have this problem is that the tests were really stable. So we didn't experience any flakiness, and the only case I think when we had failing tests without an actual problem was when we were having version mismatch. So developers were running locally with one version of Cypress, and then in the CI there was a different version of Cypress. But we didn't have any other problems.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? No? It's okay. Thank you, Aneta, for your presentation. Thank you all.